Okay, the Chargers roll into New York MetLife and handle the Zach Wilson-led Jets. We got 2 4-4 teams, and we'll dive into that game. A lot of other stuff. The Bengals are coming. Joe Burrow, Higgins, Chase like a rocket ship. The Bills got a lot of issues. And then we got to touch on, first and foremost, the Giants, who are having the season from hell. Daniel Jones now officially torn ACL. And then the Raiders, who beat the Giants, and Tommy DeVito, and they celebrated that thing like they won the Super Bowl, and the Josh McDaniels firing. So we will dive into all of that as well. But first, make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. Apple, Spotify, we got you covered. You're watching this on YouTube, hammer that like button, subscribe to the page, and leave a comment below if you wish. Also, what I need you to do is go to thevolume.com, search the merch. We got hats, thevolume.com. And before we dive into some football talk, here's what I need you to do. I need you to go to your smartphone. I need you to grab your iPad, and I need you to go to your app store. And I need you to download a little app that happens to be the official ticketing app of this podcast, Gametime. And when you download the Gametime app, here's what you need to do. Sign up for a pair of tickets. Football, basketball, hockey starting, concerts, comedy shows. You go to their map, interactive ticketing map, pick by price point, see where you want to sit. It gives you a line of sight to where you're sitting. And then hammer the promo code JOHN, that's JOHN, JOHN, promo code JOHN, $20 off your first pair of tickets. Any event, any sport, any concert, any comedy show, Gametime. Download the Gametime app, promo code JOHN. Jets, Chargers. Where do we start? I think we got to start with Robert Saleh, the New York Jets, Zach Wilson. One, Robert Saleh has 7 kids. He has now coached Zach Wilson essentially for 2 straight years. And you're telling me he does not have one gray hair on that beard? It'd be one thing if he was a 30-year-old coach like Sean McVay 10 years ago or whatever. Robert Saleh's 44. 7 kids, Zach Wilson, no grace. Come on. Like that color job to me has some Coach K vibes. Good-looking guy. I respect it. I'm pro Robert Saleh, but he's coloring his beard now. This isn't Hollywood. This is MetLife. This is Jersey. Rumors have always had there's some bodies buried under there. The mob. This is tough guy city. Color in the beard. I don't know. Zach Wilson, I don't know either. The Jets are a varsity defense with a JV offense. Why they got Aaron Rodgers, who's on the sideline, somehow is walking around with a torn Achilles. No one knows how he's doing it, but he's doing it. But regardless, he can't play quarterback for them, and they're screwed because they're rolling out Zach Wilson in an offensive line that is terrible. Now, big picture, if Aaron had played, it's pretty clear it would not have been easy, and there would have been times he was running for his life. But Aaron Rodgers blindfolded on one leg with his right hand tied behind his back is better than Zach Wilson. Part of playing the quarterback position, we'll talk about later, CJ Stroud, obviously Joshua Dobbs. We talk all the time like, can you make this throw? Can you go through your reads? Well, it's a lot like a running back with the ball in his hands or a DB covering a wide receiver down the field. Do you have instincts, right? And instincts at quarterback is not something we often talk about, but you can tell it, especially with athletic quarterbacks. It's why Russell Wilson became a star. It's why everyone a couple years ago wanted to trade for Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray. You watch these athletes, and they just have a great feel for like doing 360s, avoiding the pass rush, keeping plays alive. And I'm not even talking about running down the field. I'm just talking about keeping plays alive behind the line of scrimmage. Josh Allen, Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, right? Zach Wilson has none of that. None of that. I mean, his instincts as a player are horrendous. And then just his accuracy on the move for a quote-unquote athletic quarterback is also awful. You could tell Troy tonight, who, I don't know where you rank Troy in the all-time quarterbacks. He was obviously a really good championship-level player and knows what it looks like, right? Has been calling the biggest games on Fox for a long period of time and down to Monday Night Football for a couple years. Was disgusted watching Zach Wilson play. was disgusted watching Zach Wilson. Obviously, when you have a bad offensive line, you got to get rid of the ball quick. You got to get the ball into your playmakers' hands. And some of those guys are open. Right now, it's not always his fault. Lazard had some bad drops. But how many times on slant routes or crossing routes does he airmail Garrett Wilson? And I think a lot like last year, and maybe he's a better guy this year in terms of knowing when to keep his mouth shut, knowing not to say something stupid that's going to want everyone in the locker room to kill him. It's got to be difficult to be a defense. At one point in time, halfway through that game, they were allowing almost 3 yards a play. They were dominating. Herbert, listen, I know the Chargers won in pretty dominant fashion, so I can't really shit on Brandon Staley. And like I've always said, he has nothing to do with the offense. I'm pro Kellen Moore. And I understand the Chargers, LaDainian Tomlinson and Lorenzo Neal are not walking through that door to run the ball down your throat. I don't care if it's Austin Eckler. I don't care if it's me or you. When you get up 14 points against the New York Jets, they want you to throw the ball. All they can do is rush the passer and create a turnover that way. I would have ran it every single play, punted, and played defense because they were not scoring. They cannot score touchdowns, especially when your defensive linemen are going to play like that, and that's their offensive line. You're going to dominate. And halfway through the game, I look at halftime, I'm like, they're throwing the ball down. They had 21 pass attempts. 21. 14-3 lead. A lot like the Eagles game. The only way they can come back is for you to turn the ball over. Throw a pick six, drop back, let one of their 17 pass rushers force a fumble. I don't care that you got Justin Herbert. I don't care if Dan Fouts is playing for you, Phillip Rivers. It does not matter. Run the ball every play. And they didn't, and it kind of kept the Jets alive because their defense, the team speed they have on defense, the pass rushers they have on defense, the amount of defensive backs, how well their linebackers are playing. But it doesn't matter if you can't score touchdowns. This is not the 2000 Ravens or the 85 Bears. It's 2023. Like, you got to get to 14, 17 points to have a chance against anybody. And tonight, with that version of Zach Wilson, I'm sorry. And let's face it, not all, like, their offensive line is horrendous. And that's another thing Troy mentioned on the broadcast. Like, a lot of people bear responsibility for what we're witnessing on this offense, right? The quarterback situation, the protection situation, like Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, it's not his fault when guys are holding on screens that he takes 30 yards or Garrett Wilson makes a play and it's called back. It's just a reality of their situation with their quarterback and their offensive line. And listen, it's a sexy story because the Jets, big brand, they've done huge television ratings this year. They play the Raiders coming up on Sunday Night Football. I just see no way possible that they can get to 9 wins with this quarterback and that offensive line play. I don't care how good their defense plays because they need you to fuck up, right? Bobby Knight died this week. What was his famous quote? Smart loses more games than dumb wins, or dumb, whatever I butchered that quote. Basically, dumb loses a lot of games more than like playing it correctly. And when you are losing to the Jets, do never pass the ball. The only way you are going to lose is like the way the Eagles did. And the Chargers messed around with it for a second. And then they realized, what are we doing? They cannot score on us. And then the rest is history. I saw, I don't know where did I read this? Pro Football Talk, maybe? After Telesco, the GM of the Chargers, traded J.C. Jackson to the Patriots, that day he went into the defensive back room and apologized to the other DBs for paying a guy that much money who didn't care, work hard, or want to be there. It's like, damn, that's pretty crazy. And the one thing you see, and I think Telesco's done a pretty good job. I mean, that punt returner they got is really explosive. Obviously, Herbert to Joey Bosa to Khalil Mack, like Derwin James, they have a lot. Keenan Allen, how about that catch tonight? What a freaking grab. Cal Bears, baby. One of the last great players that program will ever have. But when you watch the Chargers, you go, God. Even tonight, I mean, Herbert, it's very, very hard to throw on that defense. So statistically, his numbers did not look great. And he made some plays down the stretch and definitely did with his legs. But that's a team that has no business not being in the playoff hunt. Now they are back in the mix. They're 4-4. Like, you watch those two teams, one team has a legit chance to be a wild card team. The other just doesn't. I mean, they just don't. Now, here's the thing with the Chargers. This short week playing the Lions. Do I feel great? Now, it's in LA, which is not a home game. That's the other thing. They have no home field advantage. So people like me can make fun of their coach all they want. And it's easy to do and make fun of their owner for being cheap. But one fundamental problem with the organization is when they play a franchise who's now good, like the Lions, in a massive game for their team. All of a sudden you win that. They get the Packers the next week. They'd be staring at 6-4 going into a Ravens game, right? All of a sudden we've got, God, are the Chargers back? The problem is, what's it going to be, 80% Lions fans? So, like, you watch the Chargers, there is no excuse with the amount of talent when healthy. You got Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Derwin James playing on defense. I mean, you got Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen. Eckler had an awful game. It felt like he had 17 drops tonight, but he's a fantastic role player on an offense. The TCU guy they drafted in the first round, not so sure about that one, but ultimately it might not matter. It's just it's hard to even judge Brandon Staley. He's playing Zach Wilson, but you're going to need him this week playing Ben Johnson, the Lions. So the pressure's on him, and all of a sudden he wins. Then you get the Packers coming up. We'll look up, and the Chargers will be 6-4. So they're not dead yet. NBA fans, the wait is over. Basketball is back, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, is celebrating with an unbeatable offer. New customers can score $200 instantly in bonus bets for throwing down $5 on the NBA. Win or lose, it doesn't matter. You'll start the season with an instant dub. And with DraftKings parlays, everyone's got a shot at even bigger basketball wins. String together multiple bets from the same game or build your parlay across multiple games for a shot at making your payday even sweeter. Basketball's more fun when you're in on the action. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code JOHN. New customers can get $200 in bonus bets instantly for betting just $5. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. Speaking of a team that is not dead yet, when you draft a quarterback really high, whether it's 1, whether it's 3, whether it's 10, but especially 1, you hope that guy changes the fortunes of everyone in your franchise. And I would say historically in my life, the true cash cows in the sport of football, I'm talking the combination is typically coach and quarterback that not only change a franchise, that change all the players that play for that coach and with that quarterback, and then all the assistant coaches and the executives financially benefit and get a huge windfall from being surrounded by that, right? When I was really, really young, it was Walsh in Montana. And then I would say in the 90s, the thing that shot like a rocket ship was Holmgren and Favre. And then it became for 20 years, Brady and Belichick. And now currently it's basically Mahomes and Reed. And there are only so many players. And listen, I think Zach Taylor, like, his resume doesn't look terrible. And he gets a lot of credit for hiring Lou Amarono. Like, a lot of people could have hired him as a defensive coordinator. He did. Now, I know Bengals fans have nitpicked him over the years, and that's part of the nature of being a head coach, a younger head coach with a superstar quarterback. But I think he's pretty solid. Do I think he's like an all-time great coach? Probably not, right? So when you look at Joe Burrow, he's basically like Peyton Manning. It doesn't matter who's coaching him. Doesn't matter who he's playing with. And obviously he's playing with really good players. That guy is going to carry an organization to fucking greatness. And that's what that guy is doing right now. Think about 2 years ago, the Bengals, when he was drafted, then he got hurt. That franchise was in shambles. The next year, they're in the Super Bowl. Last year, they're going blow for blow with the Chiefs. Easily could have been in the Super Bowl again. And then this season, they start slow. I mean, they have the last couple of years, but it's pretty easy now looking back. Like, he was injured. Because now when he's healthy, he's the best player in the freaking league. He's got 10 touchdowns over the last 4 games. He's easily been the best player on the field basically the last 3 or 4 games they've played. Last night on Sunday Night Football against Josh Allen, who also kind of needs to turn into Joe Burrow because his team's kind of in shambles. It's like, yeah, I'm going to play way better than you. I'm going to be the best player on this field. We talked about it last week. To me, this game was going to be defined by those quarterbacks are essentially in some order on a given week, 2 and 3, right? Because Mahomes kind of has it entrenched with a couple Super Bowls, a couple MVPs. And I'd say Joe Burrow has kind of slid into number 2. Obviously, Josh is battling a case of the turnovers. He's throwing like a pick a game these last 5 games. And what Joe Burrow, like the gap between those two teams, the other fascinating part about that game is in the playoffs, the Bengals beat the shit out of them. So for the Bills, I understand they have a lot of injuries this year, but that game was somewhat of a kitchen sink game. It's a game, a team in your conference, a team that you're going to have to go through in the playoffs. It's a team that's already beat you in the playoffs. And let's face it, that score did not reflect what we witnessed watching that game. There was a clear gap between the last place AFC North Cincinnati Bengals and that Buffalo Bills team. Now, can the Bills get it together? I wouldn't count them out yet, but relative to the Bengals, like, I'm sorry, they're no longer in the discussion. A lot of you have been firing in my DMs. Stop putting the Bills on the top tier. Listen, they are not right now. As we sit here in early November 2023, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Bengals, like the Bills aren't in their world. They're just not. And obviously Joe Burrow has changed a franchise that had kind of become a joke again, right? They had battled it at different points and times in my life. They'd been a running joke, and then Carson Palmer and Ocho and Hushmanzada came in. Then they became a joke again, and then Marvin Lewis and kind of that the Andy Dalton crew became really good with the Pac-Man and I almost said it, and AJ Green and Eifert, and they got a bunch of really good Giovanni Bernard, and like they were really, really good. And then they went through a lull again, and now they feel like the best version, and it's mainly because of him. They've had some really good players over the last couple decades. This guy is easily their best player. And obviously how great Chase is, their connection. But what did he say after that game? We're going to go after with T. Higgins. We needed to get him going. And they did. Now Mixon's playing well. That offense looks fantastic. That team is, I was thinking like if I was a little kid and still played video games, I would be the Bengals for sure in Madden. I would be the Bengals for sure in NFL Blitz. That would probably be my team. Because whenever I watch them, I'm like, God, this team's fun. The two receivers, the running back. I like their defensive coordinator. I like their whole squad. I really do. So if I'm a Bengals fan, I'm pumping my chest out this week, even though we're in last place, but we will not be there long. Okay, the Giants and the Raiders. Before we dive into the Raiders, sometimes you just get a season from hell, you know? And listen, part of life is you go through some shit. And the more shit you go through, the older you get, you realize, you know, the sun comes up the next day. No matter how bad personally or professionally, whether you lose a job, you lose a parent, I've been there, both places. It can really knock you on your ass. And you just realize as time goes on, like you don't have a choice. You have to move forward. You can only have a pity party. You can only stay in kind of, you know, a negative spot in a dark place for so long. Like the world keeps rolling, right? And the older you get, the easier it is to get through tougher times. In football, it's no different. Like going through a shitty season is god awful. There's nothing worse. My second year in the NFL was the quote unquote Eagles dream team. And we started 4-8. And honestly, it might have been 0-12. It felt terrible. I was in the office every day. It made me think like, I want to quit football. I can't do this. Somehow I think we won the last 4 games, went 8-8. It was not an 8-8 team. It was not a very good team. Next year, won like 4 games. You go through bad times. And the key is you have to keep losing. That's the only key, because there is no benefit when shit hits the fan to be anywhere in the middle ground. You have to have one direct option, and that's draft really high and then change your franchise. We just talked about the Bengals, right? What happened to them? For a couple year span, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, because they drafted high, T. Higgins, changed their entire franchise. Just a couple players. And let's face it, the Giants made some terrible decisions because it was like, they were riding high. Everyone was so positive. They paid Daniel Jones all that money. They franchised Saquon Barkley. It's a disaster. I said it a couple weeks ago. Trade Saquon Barkley. You don't think this, like right now sitting there, they wish they would have traded? You can't trade him to the Cowboys. You can't. You wouldn't want to trade Saquon Barkley to the Cowboys for like their second round pick. Would have done that in a heartbeat. John Morrow wouldn't, but he's not a great running a team. Look at him. Look what the Giants have become. And the Daniel Jones situation, listen, it's an unlucky, obviously he'd been playing poorly, but the play in which that he tore his ACL, pretty innocuous, looked like a little slip. All of a sudden he's back in the back of the stadium, and then it's a torn ACL. Well, now there's no excuse, right? They're playing with Tommy DeVito. They are going to consistently lose. And it's all going to be about what they do this offseason. Do they pick the right quarterback? The other thing is when you lose and you draft 2 or 3, you draft 2 or 3 in every round. It gives you an incredible opportunity to change your franchise forever. And let's face it, they've kind of been stuck with Daniel Jones, right? And obviously they paid him when they shouldn't have, so they're even stuck longer. This might be a get-out-of-jail-free card. So sometimes when it rains, you just have to realize the sun's going to come out. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not the next day, but the sun eventually is going to come out. So this season is going to get even uglier as a Giants fan. All you have to realize is like this Daniel Jones situation that you'd been looking in the mirror from about the second game, like what are we going to do? This might be your out. And if they pick the right quarterback, which is always hard, it's a 50-50 proposition to begin with, could change your franchise forever. The Raiders, or at least for the foreseeable future. I was thinking about this today because whether you're old, whether you're young, we see coaches in the NFL right now. Pete Carroll is 72 years old. I think Andy Reid's in his mid-60s. Obviously, Bill's over 70. Nick Saban's over 70. And then you see some of these coaches like Sean McVay, who's my age, 37, 38 years old. To me, as a coach, as a human, I don't care what you do, you either can relate to people or you can't. And just because you can't relate to people as a coach, as whatever you do, doesn't mean you can't figure out and be successful at your job. But it always helps to be able to just understand what makes people tick. And some people are excellent at that. I would say Andy Reid, elite at that. Pete Carroll, unreal at that. It's one of their strengths as a coach. And some guys like Josh McDaniels, at least as a coordinator, clearly was not great at it. But it didn't matter because he always had the umbrella of Tom, and Bill could handle that shit. Say what you want about Bill. He could be a curmudgeon and an angry guy. But when you notice the McCourtys, the Gronks, the Vrabels, whoever, when they talk about Bill, from a coaching perspective, Randy Moss, he's actually pretty easy to interact with. People like dealing with him when it comes to coach-player relationship, if you're a decent player, just communicating. Josh McDaniels, you get him out of the umbrella, he can't interact with anybody. And I gave him the benefit of the doubt last week when he was fired. I was like, I don't think it was as negative as the Denver situation the last time around. I think this was more, the team was awful. Well, it turns out the Jay Glazer report, all the other stories, it was equally as bad. People hated this guy's guts. And the only reason, I don't know about you, but I don't hate that many people anymore. But I'm not really around that many people. Like, I don't go into an office every day. When I've thought about it, and I thought about it today, the people I've hated over the years, right, in my adult life, have basically been people that I spent all these hours around in an office setting. And you can't really avoid them, right? Well, it's no different as a player and a coach, right? Why would they hate Josh McDaniels? Because I don't, just because I see you say something I disagree with on the internet or whatever, I don't care, right? But when you spend time with someone on a daily basis, you can get to a point where you despise them really quick, especially if they're superior. And one thing that was clear with Josh McDaniels, his tact and his ability to interact with human beings, whether you grew up in a country club, whether you grew up in the hood, whether you play linebacker, or whether you're a kicker, he has no ability to do it. And every guy to a man in that locker room pretty clearly wanted that fucking guy gone. And I saw some people on the internet saying, this is what low-level teams do when players go to the owners and air their grievances. And I'd say, yeah, if people did that to a successful coach, right, a guy with pelts on the wall, a dude that had respect, I'd be like, yeah, those are probably loser players. And then I look at the Raiders locker room like, well, who are their main team captains? Max Crosby, who's like universally beloved and respected in the NFL. Who's their star in offense? Oh, I don't know, a guy that just came from the Packers and was used to winning and is also known as one of the higher character guys in the league. Now, here's the thing about football. If you just got Josh McDaniels and Antonio Pierce on a whiteboard and just said, go to town, there's probably no chance that Antonio Pierce, even though he played at a really high league, could go toe-to-toe with that pen and that whiteboard. Why? Josh has 2 decades right next to Bill Belichick. Like, the knowledge he has in his mind and his head and his ability in a film room by himself or with players is probably elite. But all that shit is completely irrelevant, right? A lot of people have great ideas. A lot of educated individuals, in theory, should be very successful, yet they can't execute anything. Think how many people you have met that have these ideas and nothing ever becomes of it. And then you watch all these successful people who maybe they didn't even talk about it. They just fucking did it. And part of coaching, the only place you get judged is on the field. No one gives a shit how many offensive plays you know. And then clearly your ability to articulate, coach, get those players to take your plays and believe in them and you and then go execute it, it can't go any worse for this guy. This guy, to me, for whatever reason, is the ultimate con man. Because I watched some different snippets over his time when he got hired, his last couple of years with the Patriots. I'm like, God, this guy seems like a pretty normal guy. And then you realize he's been faking it the whole time. He can't be normal. I've sat with a lot of these football coaches. Half of football is just bullshitting with players or your other coaches. It's not that fucking hard. And to have everyone terrified for their life on a daily basis, like you are Bill Parcells, how did Josh, he couldn't have learned from it because he doesn't have the capability. And Antonio Pierce, is he going to go on to be a really good coach? I have no clue. Does he know what he's doing? From a coaching perspective, I don't know. But one thing he clearly can do, and he did it as a player when he was a team captain for a Super Bowl champion, and he did it immediately this week, is he could just interact with the guys as a human being, as a man to man. Just, I'm going to give you some respect. I want to listen to what you have to say because I don't know it all. And I think that's part of Josh's problem because of his success under Belichick and Brady. He believes to his core that he knows it all. The problem is he clearly does not. And the thing you have to know the most when it comes to being a good coach is then how to interact, motivate, and coach that player. And that's something that he clearly lacked. And at this point in time, with all the separation from the Denver disaster to where he was just fired a week ago, he's never going to figure it out. He literally had a decade to do the look in the mirror, introspection, and think and grow and change. Sometimes you just can't change, right? In football and scouting, the famous saying was always like, a leopard doesn't change its spots. Josh McDaniels isn't changing what Josh McDaniels is. This is who he is. And do you know what we found out? He's number 2. Make him your offensive coordinator. You better have, a very powerful head coach. You better have high character guys in the building. Because if Josh is ever going to be tasked with the guy communicating to your players constantly, you're going to have problems. And you remove Tom from that equation, the fucking building burns down, and it burns down quick. So props to Antonio Pierce for, I don't know, just being nice to guys, just having conversations, just listening to them. I didn't think it could go down that road again, but you could argue the Glazer story, some of the things we've heard, borderline just as embarrassing of what Josh went through in 07 and 08. Okay, last but not least, Morgan & Morgan, player that made it look easy. There's so many guys we go with, right? Joshua Dobbs comes off the couch, the plane, doesn't even know the playbook. CJ Stroud throws 5 touchdowns and 500 yards. But I'm a huge fan of this guy. And I think sometimes when you get in positions where it's your quarterback gets paid, the star receiver is going to get an astronomical amount of money, and you're kind of the number 2 guy. It's like, well, is this team, they talked about trading me in the offseason, then they don't. Are they going to let me hit free agency? Are they actually going to sign me? I'm kind of in no man's land. We're all human beings. It's easy to get into a rut as a person, especially as a player. And I think T. Higgins, he battled some injuries early, but that game against Buffalo, 8 catches, 110 yards, him going with Burrow after the game, talking to the sideline reporter, and you could just see the spirit in him. And if you get T. Higgins rolling, we know how good Chase is, assuming his back's going to be fine after that crazy catch. Joe Mixon's rolling. Like, that's the best offense in the league. That level of talent is just, that's like what the Chiefs were 3 or 4 years ago when they had Hill with Kelsey. That's what that offense is. It's unstoppable when the quarterback's going to play like that. So props to T. Higgins for keep swinging. Props to Joe Burrow for keeping them lined up. And just props to the Bengals. Like I said earlier, really enjoy watching them play. If you're ever injured, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/John or dial pound law, pound 529 from your cell phone. That's forthepeople.com/John. Okay, let's dive into the Houston Texans and their quarterback. And listen, the fun part about any draft, beside maybe there's 1 or 2 players a draft that it's just like legitimately impossible for them not to be decent, right? Like Julio Jones or Myles Garrett or Von Miller. Like, even if they don't live up to the hype, they are going to play in the league for a decade plus. Clowney, Ndamukong Suh, neither one of those guys, I would say, lived up to the billing and still went on to have a decade plus career. Suh, who I went to a dinner with a guy on Friday that said they saw him at the mall in Arizona, I mean, is still trying to play. Obviously, Jadeveon Clowney still going. Like, there are some guys, no one is guaranteed to go to the Hall of Fame, but some guys' floor is so freaking high that it's impossible for them to, quote unquote, be a bust or not just a solid starter for a long time. The overwhelming majority of players are risky. There is no guarantee, and especially quarterbacks. So no matter how good you are in college, no matter how much we all love watching you, there is a huge element of risk at that position. If you watch CJ Stroud over this couple of years at Ohio State, it was stupid how effortlessly it was for him to throw the ball. How beautiful the ball looked in the air. Now it was easy to be like, well, look who he's throwing to. It's so easy. Their team's so much better. You could argue either side. And then that Georgia game happened. You're like, God, I've never seen him look like that. And I would say I went back and I watched a decent amount of that game yesterday. But I don't blame you if you weren't dialed into Texans Tampa. And then I went today and I watched every one of his throws. And I think a huge area that separates quarterbacks from being good players and basically busts, guys that are drafted high that can't be long-term starters, is the ability to layer throws. Most guys can throw a go route. Most guys can be accurate on an out route. Most guys on a quick, wheel route or an option route, they can hit those the majority of the time. It's can they layer throws between different types of zone defenses and just different defensive concepts where there's a linebacker, your receiver, and then another defensive back. And you have to do that time and time again to win games in the NFL. And a lot of guys can never do that or are never accurate doing that. They can attempt to do that. They throw picks. They overthrow it. They just can't consistently hit that pass. That's what all the great and long-term starting quarterbacks can do pretty consistently. Layer touch passes with accuracy. And that's one thing CJ Stroud does currently with his eyes closed. I would say his arm is good, not great. His athleticism is definitely better than we once thought going back to the Georgia game. He can move. I wouldn't call him some crazy athlete, but athleticism is something that if he does have to leave the pocket, he can keep plays alive. He did that several times. And he's kind of an instinctive playmaker. But inside the pocket, one of his comps was Jared Goff. And people forget like that for a while, that was like a negative thing. Jared Goff was the number 1 overall pick, had a ton of success in LA, and is now kicking ass and taking names for the Detroit Lions. What Jared Goff does not possess, like his athleticism for NFL standards, between 0 and 10 is close to a 0. It's like, I'd put it like a 1 or a 2. If Lamar and Kyler and guys like that are like 9s, 10s, CJ is probably somewhere in the middle, but he definitely is much more confident moving around and throwing. It's not something that he wants to rely on. So to me, his ceiling relative to Jared Goff, who you can tell when it's built well around him is pretty damn good, is higher. And listen, I can't pretend I like Bryce Young more. It's pretty clear, like, based on the evidence we have, there is not a soul in the NFL, and that includes Carolina, that wouldn't take CJ Stroud over Bryce Young. Now, at quarterback, a lot, you're dependent on your offensive coordinator, your skill guys. A lot of stuff is out of your control. But if you just watch CJ and you watch Bryce, it doesn't really look like they're comparable right now as talents. Obviously, there's a lot of unknown with Anthony Richardson, but his skill set and physical attributes are the best of the group. And Will Levis has a really good arm as well. But CJ is just a natural passer, is something that clearly translates from college, and the accuracy on those layered throws. And then you never know with the poise. And that's something I think sometimes in college, when your team is so much better, how are you going to react when you don't have the protection and you're getting peppered by NFL guys making 10, 20, $25 million? And he shows a lot of that. So to me, the accuracy, the touch passes on the layered throws, and the poise, because his stats are pretty stupid right now. And I would say it feels like he's a runaway train based on the way things are going for Rookie of the Year. He's got 14 touchdowns, 1 interception so far in the season. Obviously had a historic day against Tampa, but if I'm a Texans fan, like my coach, I'd buy all the stock in D'Amico, and I would have before he even accepted a head coaching job. He was destined to be a stud head coach, just like Mike Vrabel once upon a time. But for those guys to be good and win, you need competent quarterback play, right? And listen, we can say what we want about Ryan Tannehill, but for a couple year stretch, he kind of became an Alex Smith version. And if you're a really good coach and I give you Alex Smith, like you're going to the playoffs. Vrabel was rattling off playoff wins and appearances. And for D'Amico to be a good head coach, he needs a competent quarterback. And it sure looks like he got one on a rookie contract. So I would be very, very excited. Who knows? Like, are you going to make the playoffs? I think Jacksonville's going to win that division. Could you make a wild card? It's hard because of the AFC. But I would say the sun is shining pretty bright right now in the Houston Texans. Joshua Dobbs. We talked about it last week when he was traded. I think one of the best attributes any one of us can have is adaptability. Because I don't care what you do for a living, whether you're a doctor, whether you're in sales, whether you're a podcaster, or whether you're an NFL quarterback, you're going to be thrown curveballs, either on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. Things that you are not expecting are going to happen professionally. And this is something I know me personally, I've had to work a lot at, right? I can be very regimented. I can be very kind of stuck in my ways. That's not the way the world works. That's not the way successful people operate. Obviously, you have to have a discipline in whatever you're doing, and some people operate better with things laid out than others. But you have to be prepared when you were going to do something and then you're not able to do that because something else came up, or this isn't working, so how are we going to get it done? And I would say most successful people in any industry are the quickest and have, I would even say, the best attitude when it comes, we got to figure this out, right? And not just freak out, meltdown. Because the moment you melt down, and listen, I've had my fair share of meltdowns, nothing gets accomplished. And at quarterback, what separates just solid players from guys that just can't function? I would say historically, when you're watching a guy in the pocket completely unravel and melt down. And a lot of times, those guys know the plays. Those guys may have been on a team for a long time. Joshua Dobbs now has proven that he can show up somewhere, not really know the plays, not know what's going on, and just kind of figure it out. Those are the type of people I like betting on in life, the figure it out guys. Can you just figure it out, right? I mean, and clearly, anyone listening to this, some people are better than that than others, right? And obviously, we all have a certain skill set in whatever we do professionally. But outside of that skill set, like, can you figure some things out? And Joshua Dobbs, everyone swears by the guy's character as a leader, as a guy, all the intangible stuff, he passes with flying colors. But there's a football element of showing up to a team. He didn't know his teammates' names. He obviously does not know the plays. He wasn't even supposed to have to play on Sunday. But what happens? Starting quarterback rookie gets throttled, concussion, out. Here you go, Josh. You don't know our cadences. You don't know our plays. Shit, you don't even know the majority of the guys in the huddle's names. We need you to help us. And what did he do? Helped him win a game. Because that's what Josh Dobbs does. I would imagine Josh Dobbs operates like that in most aspects of his life, right? Whether it's putting a desk together at his house, whether it's figuring out how am I going to get to point A to point B, or whether it's figuring out a play on a drive late in the game when he barely knows the playbook. That's who Josh Dobbs is. That's why I would bet on that. If Joshua Dobbs was a stock, I would bet on the individual. And one thing for his NFL stock, I would say he has done, because I Googled it yesterday during the game. How old's this guy again? 28 years old. I would say at minimum, he has set himself up for another 7-8 years in his NFL career. Maybe not as a full-time starter, but as a guy that successful teams will want on their team as a backup. Worst case scenario, $3, $4, $5 million to back up Patrick Mahomes, to back up Dak Prescott or Josh Allen. So if those guys get injured and shit hits the fan in the middle of a game, maybe a playoff game, you're capable enough to come in and just help figure it out. And obviously, as a player, have the physical characteristics to make some plays athletically with your arm, and guys naturally rally around you. So I don't know if you like, I don't see how if you follow football, you can't respect this guy to the nth degree, to admire what he just did on Sunday is just freaking remarkable. What a cool story. And speaking of something that isn't a cool story, E40 said once in Rapper's Ball in the mid-90s, a song he did with Too Short, don't buy an $85,000 car before you buy a house. This was in like 95 or 96. So essentially what he was talking about is like a $250,000 car in inflationary 2023 times. Like, why are you spending money on that when you're renting an apartment? Buy a fucking house first. And when the Atlanta Falcons drafted a running back at number 8, when they were several players and a quarterback away from being anything, it made absolutely no sense. I believe still November 6th, this is not playing Monday morning quarterback. I believed it at the time, and every day since. It's one of the dumbest draft picks I'd ever seen, especially when you factored in how good their running game was last year with the guys they had on their roster who were all coming back on rookie contracts. I can't fathom that pick. Now, I've defended Detroit, average draft, not many players, but they turned their running back also into a tight end, which we talked about last week. I do not understand the Falcons. And clearly, even once they got Bijan, their coach struggles to use him. So it's like, what's the point of even having this running back when you're not a running back away, drafting Bijan, regardless of their speed, their ability in the open field, how talented they are, just doesn't make sense. Now, we could argue till we're blue in the face who they should have taken. You just can't take a running back in that spot. And I think it reflects their franchise. Like, what is going on there? And I heard Michael Lombardi say this about the Raiders. I think it's starting to kind of come into play for Arthur Smith, that you can only have so many kick in the dick losses that everyone's making fun of you for, that your owner's watching, like, how do we lose that game? Anyone can lose a bad game. It's football. Crazy things happen. Nick Saban once attempted to kick a field goal in the Iron Bowl, and I forget the guy's name. I think his last name was Davis because the Niners signed him as an undrafted free agent. Took her the house, right? It was got to be one of the most embarrassing moments in Nick Saban's coaching career at Alabama. It happens, right? But when you start losing, and Josh McDaniels did this a lot, to Jeff Saturday, to Baker Mayfield, to the dude from Shepherd College, it's like, what are we doing here, right? And I think that's what Atlanta's starting to feel like. What is our direction? Where are we going? Because Detroit, very early on, it felt like they had a plan, they had a direction, even when they were losing. It's why last year, if you watched Monday Night Countdown, Dan Campbell started crying, talking about the 2021 team, the team that sucked, the team that laid the foundation to kind of where they're at now, because he felt like they were building something like kind of where they were headed. Where is this Atlanta team going? To me, it feels like they're going in no man's land. And their draft over the last several years of just taking all these skill positions kind of reflect that. Like, they don't understand football, which is kind of crazy. Everyone loves Arthur Smith. His dad was super successful. One time I kind of got, I wouldn't say drunk with him. I was at a bar sitting right next to him at the Combine years ago. Feels like an easy guy to root for, but I'm just not sure him and his GM really know what they're doing from a team building standpoint. And then it reflects in the games. Don't miss the action this weekend when the NFL heads to Germany for the Frankfurt games. These games will air on NFL Network and stream on on NFL Plus. For a limited time, Verizon customers can get Netflix and NFL Plus for just $25 a month with Plus Play. That's $120 in annual savings. Plus Play is a platform where Verizon customers can shop, manage, and save on subscriptions you already love, like NFL Plus. With NFL Plus Premium, you get access to live games on mobile, NFL Red Zone, and NFL Network, which means you can catch the Frankfurt games and save. Just go to Verizon.com/thevolume to bundle and save before the games. Hurry, this offer ends soon. Again, that's Verizon.com/thevolume. There was a visual yesterday of, Jonathan and Robert Kraft sit together at the Patriot games. They have forever. A lot of times like Bon Jovi or Jay-Z or someone famous is sitting next to him, but it's always Jonathan Kraft, Robert Kraft, right? And there was this visual yesterday as they were losing the Commanders, a team that traded their two best players. And I almost said Heineke, but it's Sam Howell, who Jonathan Allen called their franchise quarterback. Of Jonathan Kraft, I don't know if he was looking at his phone, reading a text message, or just looking at his dad, and he essentially mouthed the word, "We're just not good enough." And it became like, I can't believe. Wait, Jonathan Kraft, watching the New England Patriots in 2023, mouthed, "We're not good enough"? That'd be like me saying, "It's hot in Arizona in the summer." Or, a company going bankrupt is having some financial trouble. Let's file that one under no shit. So maybe we could look into, like, are the Crafts going to do something? But them mouthing, "We're not good enough," is not a story. The team being 2-6 or 2-7 or whatever the hell the record is, headed nowhere fast, tells you all you have to do is watch them for 3 or 4 series and know this team stinks. They're going nowhere and nowhere fast. And if anything, every loss they have is good. Because when you're not good, every win is so pointless, right? It's like I talked about earlier with Burrow and Brian Flores. When you have the chance to lose when you're 2-11, there is no point to win any of those games. It does nothing because the majority of guys on your team are not going to be back. You're going to have a new quarterback. Like, winning a random game in the middle of the December when you are drafting second and it moves you to sixth is the dumbest business decision you can make in this billion-dollar industry. I will never support it. I have no problem with anyone trying to win in October, hell, even November. Like, I get why Bill's trying to win right now. Every game Bill loses, he's trying to win. Now, once we get to like Christmas, losing those last 3 games should be a mandate from the owner. I will always support. This is big boy business, right? There is no tanking in the NFL like there is in the NBA, where teams just literally tank the entire season. Same with baseball. But in the NFL, I do support, like, yeah, let's just throw out a bunch of practice squad guys the last 3 games of the season. No issue with that. Because I know, hell, I'm watching Eberflus yesterday. It's like, God, this guy's trying. That's the sad part about all these Bears losses. He's really, really trying to win. Yeah, he looks terrible, by the way. I mean, he just looks like a guy who hasn't seen the sun in months. This job is aging him. Watch him on the sideline against the Saints. Like, God, I'd be shocked if he makes his return. And think about, so like the Kraft thing is one of the biggest nothing burger stories of all time. He literally was watching his team, who is terrible, and then he mouthed, "We're not good enough." I mean, thanks. Is the sky blue as well? Like, thanks, Captain Obvious. Obviously, the internet loves to make this stuff something bigger than it is, but it's what everyone's thinking. In the stadium watching that game, every Patriot fan watching that game, hell, every person that roots for the Washington Commanders watching Belichick's team. And speaking of the Bears, they signed Sweat to like a 4-year, $98 million deal and gave him over $70 million. This is what I said on the trade when I couldn't wrap my head around it. There is no way, even on the open market, anyone was offering a guy that is a consistent he's not a double-digit sack guy every year basis, $70+ million. Now, because it's free agency, guys get overpaid. Look at McGlinchey, right? Starting right tackle, Sean Payton gives him $50 million. Honestly, probably $10 million guaranteed more than other teams were even willing to pay. So you pay a premium once you hit free agency. Sweat, anyone offering that guy $60 million guaranteed on the open market? Maybe, in that 55, 60, because he's probably ideally a 45, $50 million guarantee guy. So you add another 10 on top of it, but no one's giving him that contract. And this is what I said. If you want this guy, why don't you just buy him on the open market? You could just make him an offer that he can't refuse and also keep your second round pick. I will never support what they did. I think it's just awful NFL business because the pick they gave up is just too valuable. That pick's going to be 34, 35, and you gave him a contract, which you would have gladly given him in the free agent market. Hell, even if that $70 million guaranteed or 71, whatever the exact number was, you had to go to 78 just to make sure you got the guy, so be it. What that extra $6-7 million is worth keeping that second round pick. So I still can't get over that move. A couple other quick things on the college front. One thing's pretty clear. If you watch their games this year, and I knew this talking to people in college football, Texas has the best team money can buy right now, right? They might not be the best team in the country, but their team, if it was public like it is in the NFL or basketball or baseball, and we saw their books, they have the most expensive team in college football. They have the highest budget allocated toward players. Everyone. I mean, their third string quarterback is making millions of dollars. Their roster is fucking loaded. And for about the last 10, 12 years, Texas became one of the most overrated programs in the country. All you got to do is look at their draft picks. They didn't have any for a long period of time. They were not an NFL factory. This team, that ain't the case. Last year, obviously, they produced some good players. This team even has more. And Sark has no excuse to not go to the playoffs. He's not a very good coach. He's just not. I'm sorry. His inability, he's playing Kansas State, which is a well-coached, overachieving program the majority of my life. They do not have nearly the talent. He has countless players on his team that make more money than the overwhelming majority of the coaching staff for Kansas State. I bet he has a couple of players that make more than their head coach, who I think I looked up makes about $4 million. Definitely Arch, and maybe even Quinn Ewers. But Sark's inability to run the ball because he's addicted to passing, to me, makes no sense. Now, he's playing with a second-string quarterback who is very physically gifted, but is not, I wouldn't call exactly C.J. Stroud passing the ball, turning the ball over, throwing incompletions. And instead of, when he was running the ball all over them, leaning on that in the second half and just annihilating them and easily winning the game, he just got pass happy. And if it wasn't for, I'm all for going for it in overtime or late in the game when you're a massive underdog. But as you watch that game play out and Texas's quarterback play is more than questionable, I don't know if I'm going for it. Like, I think I'm kicking field goals, kicking extra points, and continuing the game. So when Kansas State went for it at the end of the game, I didn't love it. I didn't love it at all because I thought, like, it's one thing when you don't have the ability to just beat them straight up, right? And obviously they have more talented players than you, but you were out coaching them. You were stopping them on defense because you know he's just going to keep throwing the ball and their quarterback is not being very accurate. So listen, if you gave this roster to Saban, to Kirby, I would say they're going to win the national championship. I still think, you just look at their schedule. Oklahoma now is in shambles. The Texas more than likely is going to be in the playoffs, but I just do not trust Sark in these big spots at all. And then last but not least, this Harbaugh Stallion story. It just is the gift that keeps on giving. He resigned, fired, whatever, Friday. I mean, some of the pictures that have gone viral. Ryan Day's brother now is reportedly the guy that uncovered it all and turned it in. Ryan Day was asked about it. He commented. The one thing I love, I love, and a buddy of mine, Michael Madsen, was here this weekend, and me and my girlfriend went to dinner with him and his wife and some other people that they work with. And he was telling me he has gone to a bunch of different games across the country. And he said, you have to go, because I had on like the 4 boxes, right? Like USC, Washington, Bama LSU and like 2 other games. And he's like, I went to Bama LSU, and he's like, it was the coolest experience of my life. He's like, if you've never been to that game, you got to go. Like, not just any SEC game, you got to go to that game. He's like, LSU in Bama, either one, go to that game. They went in Alabama. It was the year that, I think Joe Burrow that won the national championship. Said it was just incredible. He's also been to a game at Tennessee. He said it was sweet. He's like, I went to the Red River rivalry last year at the Cotton Bowl. He's like, that was cool. It was cool, but it wasn't that. So there's a passion in the SEC and the Big Ten that when stuff like this happens, the other schools are not going to stop. Their fan bases, their radio hosts, their bloggers, it's going to be relentless. So everyone in the Big Ten is, and listen, Harbaugh's an easy guy to hate. That program, the way he runs it's easy to hate. And then now you factor in the story, the stealing stuff. I get it. But I love the passion that it brings out from Ohio State, from Penn State, from even the Purdue coach talking shit. Like these are nuclear secrets. How passionate and serious everyone takes it makes it extremely entertaining. Who knows? There was a story yesterday that he was going to get suspended, and then Michigan was going to appeal with a lawyer and file for an injunction. It's like, I can't keep up with everything going on, but I don't want this story to end. It's just the headlines of the story, Connor Stallions, thank you for your service, are just too entertaining to me. And what I think is most fascinating about this is Michigan could easily win the national championship. They definitely, they beat Ohio State. They're going to the playoffs. I think they're going to be the 1 seed and more than likely favored. So it's just going to be the story ain't stopping. So even if you are kind of tired of it, you better buckle up because it ain't going anywhere. Something magical happens when the third quarter ends and the fourth quarter begins. The energy changes. The fourth quarter is where games are won, where champions are made. And in business, it's where sales teams become legends. That's why HubSpot built Sales Hub to give sales reps the deal-making tools they need to win in Q4 and close the year strong. Sales Hub, prospecting workplaces, organizes your schedule, goals, and to-do lists in one place to save your team precious fourth quarter time. Smart sequences help sales reps close deals faster than ever. And with an easy-to-use deal management tool, reps can find, track, and close deals all in one place. Plus, AI forecasting helps you accurately predict future success, which means less hoping for deals and more crushing targets. Put your sales team on the fast track to winning Q4 with Sales Hub. Learn more at HubSpot.com/sales.